The city lights below flickered like a sea of diamonds, a cold and electric ocean that I had spent my entire life conquering. From the 50th floor of the Sterling Tower, the world looked small, manageable, and insignificant. I was Arthur Sterling, the man who could move markets with a whisper, the tycoon who had turned a modest inheritance into an empire that spanned continents. They called me a visionary, a titan of industry, a man who had everything. But as I stood there, pressing my forehead against the freezing glass of the floor-to-ceiling window, I realized with a terrifying clarity that I had absolutely nothing. The silence in the penthouse was not peaceful. It was oppressive. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from decades of ruthless decisions and emotional isolation. The air conditioning hummed a low, monotonous drone that sounded suspiciously like a funeral dirge, counting down the seconds I had left. Earlier that afternoon, Dr. Hallowell had sat in the leather armchair across from my desk, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly as he delivered the news. He didn't use the word terminal immediately, but the implication hung in the air between us like a toxic fog. Months, maybe weeks. My heart, the engine that had driven me through 80-hour work weeks and hostile takeovers, was simply giving up. It was failing, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a pathetic, sputtering whimper. I remembered reaching for my checkbook, a reflex honed by 50 years of solving problems with money. I wanted to ask him how much it would cost to fix it. How much for a new heart? How much for 5 more years? How much to make the fear go away? But I stopped myself before I could humiliate us both. For the first time in my life, my net worth was irrelevant. The billions in the bank were just numbers on a screen, completely useless against the biological reality of my own mortality. I showed the doctor out with a stiff nod, maintaining the facade of the invincible Arthur Sterling until the elevator doors slid shut. Then, I collapsed into this chair, the silence rushing in to fill the space where my future used to be. Now, staring at the city I supposedly owned, the truth began to seep into my bones. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of dying alone. And I was going to die alone because I had meticulously, efficiently, and deliberately drove away everyone who had ever dared to love me. My mind drifted back to the beginning, before the private jets and the magazine covers. I thought of Elena, my beautiful, patient Elena. I could almost smell her perfume, a scent of lavender and rain that used to greet me when I came home late. She had tried, God knows she had tried, to anchor me to the ground. She used to tell me that ambition was a fire, useful if controlled, but deadly if allowed to rage. I let it rage. I let it burn down everything. I remembered the night she left, 30 years ago. It wasn't a screaming match. There were no thrown vases or dramatic ultimatums. It was quiet, which made it infinitely worse. She had simply packed a bag, stood at the door, and looked at me with eyes that were no longer angry, just empty. She told me that she couldn't live with a ghost anymore, that I was present in body, but my soul had been sold to the highest bidder years ago. I didn't chase her. I didn't beg her to stay. I sat at my desk and checked the Tokyo Stock Exchange, telling myself that she was weak, that she didn't understand the sacrifices required for greatness. I told myself I was building this empire for us, for our future, but that was the first great lie. I was building it for my own ego, to fill a hole inside me that was bottomless. And then there was Julian, my son. The thought of him sent a sharp physical pain shooting through my chest, sharper than the angina that had been plaguing me for weeks. Julian had his mother's eyes and my stubbornness. He had worshipped me once. I remembered him sitting on the floor of my office, building towers out of blocks, looking up at me as if I were a god. But gods are cruel, and I was no exception. I wanted him to be me. I wanted to mold him, harden him, turn him into the perfect heir. I crushed his dreams of being an artist with a brutality that I mistook for parenting. I ridiculed his passion, starved him of approval, and forced him into suits that didn't fit and boardrooms where he suffocated. The break happened 10 years ago. The merger. I forced him to fire 300 employees to boost our quarterly earnings. Good, loyal people. He refused. He pleaded with me, argued that we had a moral obligation, that we were already profitable enough. I looked him in the eye and told him he was soft. I told him he wasn't a sterling. The look on his face that day haunted me every night. It wasn't hate. It was pity. He pitied me. He placed his resignation letter on the mahogany desk, the sound of the paper sliding across the wood echoing like a gunshot. He said, "Keep the money, Dad. Keep the company. I'd rather be poor and able to look at myself in the mirror." He walked out, and unlike his mother, he didn't look back. I cut him off. I disinherited him. I erased his existence from the company records as if he were a clerical error. I told everyone he was ungrateful, a failure. But in the dead of night, in this mausoleum of a penthouse, I knew the truth. He was the only success I had ever produced, and I had thrown him away because he was better than me. Tonight, the weight of those memories was crushing. I turned away from the window and walked slowly through the penthouse. I passed the collection of rare Renaissance art that I never looked at, the grand piano that no one played, the dining table that seated 20 but had only ever served one. It was all ash. It was all dust. The doctor said I had weeks. Weeks to do what? To make more money? To secure another legacy? The only legacy I was leaving behind was a cautionary tale of greed. Panic began to rise in my throat, a sour, metallic taste. I was going to die in this golden cage, and no one would shed a real tear. The lawyers would mourn the billing hours, the shareholders would worry about the stock price, but no human heart would ache for Arthur Sterling. I stumbled into my study and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. My hands shook as I pushed aside old ledgers and legal documents until I found it. A photograph. It was crinkled, the colors fading to sepia. It was taken on a beach 40 years ago. Elena was laughing, the wind whipping her hair across her face, and Julian was a toddler, burying my legs in the sand. I was smiling in the photo. A real smile, not the shark-like grin I used for magazine covers. I looked happy. I looked human. I traced the face of the boy in the picture with my thumb. Where was he now? Was he happy? Did he have children? Did he tell them about their grandfather, the monster in the high tower? Or was I a secret, a shame buried deep in his past? A sudden, desperate resolve seized me. I couldn't die like this. I couldn't let the last chapter of my life be written in ink of regret and silence. It was too late to save my life. The doctor had made that clear. But was it too late to save my soul? Was it too late to beg for forgiveness, not from a priest or a god, but from the people I had actually wronged? The logic of the businessman tried to intervene. It's a bad investment, Arthur. The emotional risk is too high. The return is unlikely. But for the first time, I told that voice to shut up. I didn't care about the return on investment. I just wanted to see him. I needed to see him. I grabbed the phone, the heavy receiver feeling like lead in my hand. I didn't dial a doctor or a lawyer. I dialed the number of a private investigator I hadn't used in years. It was 2 a.m., but I didn't care. Money could still buy some things, like waking a man up in the middle of the night to find a ghost. Find him, I whispered into the receiver, my voice cracking. Find Julian. I don't care what it costs. Just find him. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, they say. But for me, the journey of redemption began with the terrified admission that I had been wrong about everything. And as I hung up the phone, the silence of the penthouse felt a little less heavy, as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting to see if the old dragon could really change his scales before the fire went out. The hours that followed the phone call were an agonizing purgatory. Time, which I had always managed with the precision of a Swiss watch, suddenly became a fluid, torturous substance that refused to pass. I paced the length of the penthouse, the plush carpet swallowing the sound of my footsteps, feeling like a prisoner in the very fortress I had built to keep the world out. Every shadow in the room seemed to whisper an accusation. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a judge's gavel striking the bench. My chest ached, a dull, constant throb that served as a grim reminder that the clock wasn't just ticking on the wall, but inside my ribcage. I tried to distract myself with work, opening my laptop to review the quarterly projections for the Asian markets, but the numbers danced on the screen, meaningless hieroglyphs that held no power over me anymore. What does a man care for profit margins when he is staring into the abyss? I was desperate for the phone to ring, desperate for the private investigator, Vance, to give me a location, a coordinate, a sign of life. It was nearly dawn when the call finally came. The sky outside was bleeding a bruised purple, the city waking up to another day of chasing dreams that I now knew were hollow. Vance was professional, efficient, and devoid of emotion, a mirror image of the man I used to be. "I found him, Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice crackling slightly over the line. "It wasn't hard. He didn't change his name. He just disappeared from your circles." He gave me an address in a small town called Oak Haven, 3 hours north of the city. He also mentioned he was emailing a preliminary dossier. I thanked him and hung up, my hand trembling so violently I nearly dropped the receiver. I walked to my computer and opened the file. There, on the high-definition screen, was the life I had exiled. The photographs were candid, taken from a distance. Julian looked older. The boyish softness I remembered was gone, replaced by the rugged lines of a man who worked with his hands. He was wearing a flannel shirt covered in sawdust, loading lumber into a battered pickup truck. He looked tired, yes, but there was a strength in his posture that I had never seen when he wore the Italian suits I forced upon him. But it was the second photograph that stole the air from my lungs and brought me to my knees. Julian wasn't alone. He was holding the hand of a small boy, maybe 7 years old, my grandson. I stared at the pixelated image, tears blurring my vision. A child I didn't know existed, a continuation of my bloodline that I had been completely ignorant of. He had my chin. He had Julian's messy hair. I touched the screen, tracing the small face, a sob ripping through my throat that sounded foreign to my own ears. I had a grandson, and he didn't know I existed. I didn't wait for the sun to fully rise. I didn't call for my chauffeur. The idea of arriving in Oak Haven in a limousine, shielded by tinted glass, felt obscene. I needed to go as a man, not a monument. I dressed in the simplest clothes I could find, a pair of slacks and a sweater I hadn't worn in years. I drove myself, taking a nondescript sedan from the garage that was usually reserved for the staff. Leaving the city felt like shedding a skin. As the skyscrapers receded in the rearview mirror, shrinking into toy blocks, I felt a strange mixture of terror and liberation. I was driving away from my empire and toward a judgment day of my own making. The drive north was a blur of autumn foliage and gray asphalt. My mind raced with scenarios. Would he slam the door in my face? Would he scream? Or worse, would he look at me with that cold indifference, treating me like a stranger soliciting at his door? Oak Haven was the antithesis of my world. It was a town where time seemed to move slower, where Main Street was lined with mom and pop stores instead of luxury boutiques. I navigated the sedan through the quiet streets, following the GPS with a heart that hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I turned onto Elm Street and slowed down. The address Vance had given me was a small, single-story bungalow at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was humble, to say the least. The paint was peeling in spots, the roof looked like it had seen better days, and the garden was overgrown with wildflowers. It was a far cry from the marble halls Julian had grown up in, but as I parked the car down the street and killed the engine, I realized it had something my penthouse lacked. It looked lived in. There was a tricycle on the lawn. There were wind chimes singing softly on the porch. It was a home. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I couldn't just walk up there. Not yet. I was a coward, paralyzed by the enormity of my sins. So I watched. I became a voyeur in my son's life. About an hour later, the front door opened. My breath hitched. Julian stepped out, holding a mug of coffee. He looked exhausted. He rubbed his lower back, a gesture of chronic fatigue, and sat heavily on the porch steps. He stared at the pile of mail in his hand, his shoulders slumping. Even from this distance, I recognized the look on his face. It was the universal expression of financial stress. I saw him open an envelope, a bill undoubtedly, and run a hand through his hair in frustration. He set the paper down and put his head in his hands. The sight tore me apart. I, who had billions sitting in offshore accounts, was watching my son agonize over what was likely a few $100s. The urge to rush out of the car, to wave my checkbook like a magic wand and make all his problems disappear, was overwhelming. But I froze. I remembered the last thing he said to me: keep the money. If I walked up there now as the savior billionaire, I would only be proving him right. I would be trying to buy his love, trying to purchase my redemption. He would hate me for it. He would see it as another power play, another way for Arthur Sterling to control the narrative. I couldn't fix this with money. Not this time. Then, the screen door opened again, and the boy ran out. My grandson. He was wearing a superhero cape made from an old towel. He jumped onto Julian's back, wrapping his small arms around his father's neck. Julian's demeanor changed instantly. The worry vanished, replaced by a wide, genuine smile. He spun the boy around, and I could hear the faint sound of their laughter carried on the wind. It was a pure, unadulterated joy that I hadn't felt in decades. They were poor, they were struggling, but they had each other. They had the one thing I had sacrificed on the altar of success. I watched them play for 20 minutes, tears streaming freely down my face now, soaking the collar of my sweater. I was an intruder witnessing a sacred ritual. Suddenly, a sharp pain seized my chest, a crushing pressure that made me gasp for air. I fumbled for the pill bottle in my pocket, my vision tunneling for a second. I swallowed the medication dry, leaning my head back against the headrest, waiting for the darkness to recede. It passed, but it left me shaken. I was running out of time. I couldn't sit in this car forever. I had to make contact, but I couldn't be Arthur Sterling, the tycoon. I had to be someone else. I had to know them, really know them, before I revealed who I was. If I went in as his father, the walls would go up instantly. But if I went in as a stranger, it was a deception, yes, a lie. But it was the only way I could think of to get close enough to earn a chance at forgiveness. I looked at the Help Wanted sign in the window of the small hardware store across the street I had passed earlier. A plan, desperate and reckless, began to form in my mind. I started the car, not to leave, but to position myself. I wasn't going back to the tower. I was going to stay here, in the shadow of my son's life, and fight for a place in it, even if I had to lie to get through the door. The millionaire was dead. The old man seeking redemption was just being born. The transformation was a deliberate act of deconstruction. I drove to a Goodwill store on the outskirts of town, parking my nondescript sedan between a rusted pickup truck and a van with a flat tire. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with a flickering instability that matched my own pulse. I walked through the aisles, surrounded by the discarded remnants of other people's lives, and selected my costume: a faded plaid shirt worn at the elbows, jeans that had been washed until they were soft and pale blue, work boots that had already walked 100 miles on someone else's feet. In the fitting room, staring at myself in the cracked mirror, Arthur Sterling, the billionaire, vanished. In his place stood Artie, a frail, elderly man with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much sorrow. The cancer had already done most of the work for me. I had lost 20 pounds in 2 months, my skin was papery, and my posture was stooped. I looked like a man who needed a break, not a man who owned the bank. I left my wallet, my Rolex, and my platinum credit cards locked in the glove compartment of the car, hidden under the spare tire. I took only a crumpled $20 bill and a fake ID I had procured years ago for corporate espionage purposes, a relic of a paranoid era that now served a poignant new function. I walked the half-mile to the address Vance had given me for Julian's workshop. It wasn't the hardware store I had seen earlier. That was just a waypoint. Julian's business was a small carpentry shop tucked behind an old gas station, a corrugated metal structure that smelled of pine resin and sawdust even from the street. The sign above the door was hand-painted, Sterling and Son Woodworks. The name hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't erased me completely. Or perhaps he was reclaiming the name, trying to give it a meaning that had nothing to do with stock options and hostile takeovers. I found him inside, sanding a large oak dining table. The air was thick with golden dust, dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the skylights. He looked up as my shadow fell across the workbench. Up close, the 10 years of silence were even more apparent. He had gray woven into his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He squinted at me, wiping his hands on a rag. There was no flash of recognition. Why would there be? The father he knew was a titan in a three-piece suit, likely screaming at a subordinate in a glass office 3 hours away. He wasn't expecting a ghost in flannel. "Can I help you?" Julian asked, his voice polite but guarded. He sounded tired, bone-tired. I saw the sign. "Well, I heard you might need a hand," I lied, my voice raspy and trembling. I didn't have to fake the tremor. My nerves were firing on all cylinders. "I don't have much. I'm just looking for something to keep me busy. I can sweep. I can organize. I know wood." Julian sighed, leaning against the table. "Look, mister, I can barely afford to keep the lights on right now. I can't pay you. I'm sorry." "I don't need money," I said quickly, locking eyes with him. "I have a pension. A small one. It's enough. I lost my wife recently." The lie tasted like ash, using Elena's memory like that, but it was the only way to bridge the gap. "The silence in my house is too loud. I just need to be around the noise of work. Please, I'll sweep the floors. You don't even have to pay me minimum wage. Just let me be useful." Something in his expression softened. He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw the grief that was genuinely there. He saw a lonely old man begging for a lifeline. "I can't let you work for free," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "But the shop is a disaster. I'm behind on 3 orders. If you can keep the place clean and organize the lumber rack, I can give you lunch and maybe $50 a week. It's an insult, I know, but it's all I have." "It's a deal," I said, extending my hand. He shook it. His grip was rough, calloused and warm. It was the first time I had touched my son in a decade. It took every ounce of my willpower not to pull him into an embrace and weep into his shoulder. For the next 6 hours, I worked harder than I had in 30 years. And it was brutal. My body, weakened by illness and atrophy, screamed in protest. Every time I bent down to sweep a pile of sawdust, my head swam. My heart fluttered in my chest like a trapped moth. But I kept going. There was a meditative quality to the manual labor, a simplicity that my life had lacked. I organized the scrap wood by species. I polished the tools. I swept until the concrete floor was spotless. And all the while, I watched him. I watched Julian work with a focus and a tenderness that was mesmerizing. He didn't just build furniture. He crafted it. He spoke to the wood, running his hands over the grain, finding the imperfections and turning them into features. He was an artist, the very thing I had mocked him for wanting to be. I saw the pride he took in a perfectly joined corner, a pride that money couldn't buy. I realized then that he was richer than I had ever been. Around 3 p.m., the school bus screeched to a halt outside and the door burst open. "Daddy!" It was the boy, Leo. He came tearing into the shop like a whirlwind of energy, dropping a backpack onto a pile of wood. Julian's face lit up, the fatigue melting away instantly. "Hey buddy, careful around the saw," Julian warned, but he was smiling. Leo skidded to a halt when he saw me. He looked me up and down with the unabashed curiosity of a 7-year-old. "Who are you?" "This is Artie," Julian said, wiping sawdust from his forehead. "He's helping us out for a while." "Hi, Artie," Leo said, marching up to me. "I'm Leo. Do you know how to make a sword?" "Dad says he's too busy to make me a sword, but I need one because the dragon under the porch is getting bold." I looked down at this small creature, my own flesh and blood, asking me for a weapon to fight imaginary monsters. I felt a lump in my throat the size of a golf ball. I think I can manage a sword," I rasped. "Make it a good one," Leo whispered conspiratorially. "It needs to be magic." While Julian finished a cabinet, I spent the last hour of the day carving a crude sword out of a piece of scrap pine. I wasn't a carpenter, but I took my time, sanding the edges so he wouldn't get splinters. When I handed it to him, Leo looked at it as if I had given him Excalibur. He beamed at me, a smile that was missing a front tooth, and ran off to slay the dragon. "You didn't have to do that," Julian said quietly, coming up beside me as I swept the last pile of dust. "He's a good kid," I said, leaning on the broom, trying to catch my breath without seeming like I was dying. "He is," Julian said, his voice dropping. "He deserves better than this." He gestured around the cluttered, dusty shop. "Things are tight. I'm trying to keep it together, but..." He stopped, shaking his head. "Sorry, I shouldn't burden you." You're just here to sweep. Sometimes sweeping clears the mind, I offered. Julian looked at his watch. Look, Artie, it's late. You worked hard today. Harder than I expected. My wife, Sarah, she's making a pot roast. It's not much, but would you like to join us for dinner? I can't pay you much, but I can feed you. Panic and desire warred in my chest. Going to his house, sitting at his table. It was dangerous. The closer I got, the higher the risk of being discovered. If he saw me eat, if he saw my mannerisms at the table, would he recognize me? But the thought of going back to a lonely motel room, eating a cold sandwich while my son and grandson broke bread together, was unbearable. I was starving, not for food, but for family. I would like that very much, I said softly. Great, Julian smiled, grabbing his keys. Come on. Leo will want to show you the dragon's lair. As I followed my son out of the shop and into the twilight, I knew I was walking onto a minefield. I was entering the sanctuary I had lost the right to enter. I was a spy in the house of love. But as Leo grabbed my hand to pull me toward the truck, his small fingers wrapping around my callous, trembling ones, I knew I would risk anything, even the truth, for just one night of belonging. The millionaire was gone. Artie was going to dinner. And for the first time in 50 years, I was terrified of something other than losing money. I was terrified of being found out. The threshold of the small bungalow felt more like a portal into a foreign dimension than a simple entryway. As I stepped inside, the scent of rosemary and roasted meat hit me with a force that was almost physical, triggering a salivary response I hadn't felt in months. My penthouse smelled of lemon pledge and filtered air. This house smelled of life. It was cluttered, yes. There were toys scattered across the worn rug in the living room, and a stack of laundry occupied a chair in the corner. But the warmth was undeniable. It radiated from the walls, from the soft yellow light of the lamps, and from the woman who emerged from the kitchen wiping her hands on an apron. Sarah, Julian's wife, was beautiful in a way that magazines don't understand. She had kind eyes framed by laugh lines, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that suggested a day of constant motion. She didn't look at me with suspicion. She looked at me with a welcoming curiosity. You must be Artie, she said, extending a hand. Julian told me you were a godsend at the shop today. I'm Sarah. I wouldn't say a godsend, I mumbled, taking her hand. It was warm and rough, a working woman's hand. Just an extra pair of hands for the broom. Well, we appreciate it, she smiled. But the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a shadow there, the same shadow I had seen on Julian, the universal shadow of insolvency. Come, sit. The roast is ready, and Leo is already eyeing the potatoes. Dinner was an exercise in emotional espionage. I sat at the small, round table, squeezed between a high chair that Leo had outgrown and a wall covered in crayon drawings. The plates were mismatched, chipped at the edges. The silverware was stamped stainless steel, not silver. But the food was divine. It was simple. Pot roast, carrots, potatoes. But it was cooked with care. I ate slowly, my throat tight. I watched Julian serve Sarah first, then Leo, giving them the choicest cuts of meat, leaving the gristly ends for himself. It was a small, unconscious act of sacrifice that shattered me. I thought of the banquets I had thrown, where thousands of dollars of food were thrown away at the end of the night, while my own son was rationing protein for his family. So, Artie, Sarah asked, pouring me a glass of water from a plastic pitcher. Where are you from? You have an accent I can't quite place. City. My heart skipped a beat. I had spent 40 years stripping my voice of any regional dialect, cultivating a neutral, commanding baritone for boardrooms. I moved around a lot, I lied, keeping my gaze on my mashed potatoes. Sales, traveling, never stayed in one place long enough to call it home. That's why I ended up here, looking for a quiet place to retire. Do you have family? Leo asked, his mouth full of carrots. Leo, don't talk with your mouth full, Julian chided gently. It's okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. No, Leo, I don't have family, not anymore. I had a son once, but we lost touch. The table went quiet. The air grew heavy. Julian stopped chewing and looked at me. For a second, I thought he saw through the disguise. I thought he saw the father who had disowned him in the eyes of the old man sitting at his table. But he just nodded. a look of profound empathy washing over his face. "I'm sorry, Artie," he said softly. "That's a heavy thing to carry." "It is," I admitted, and it was the most honest thing I had said all day. "But being here, it helps." As the meal wound down, the reality of their situation began to intrude on the domestic tranquility. The phone on the kitchen wall rang, a harsh, jarring sound. Julian flinched. He exchanged a quick, terrified glance with Sarah. "I'll get it," he said, standing up too quickly. He walked into the kitchen, stretching the cord as far as it would go, trying to lower his voice. But in a small house, secrets are hard to keep. I pretended to listen to Leo describe the dragon's powers, but my ears were tuned to the kitchen. "I know, Mr. Henderson." Julian's voice was tight, strained. "I know it's past due. I'm waiting on a check from the Anderson job. As soon as it clears, please. I just need another week. We can't... Look, if you foreclose now, you won't get the full value anyway. Just give me a week." There was a pause, then a defeated sigh. "Okay, Friday. I promise." "Thank you." Julian hung up the phone and stayed in the kitchen for a long moment. I saw him leaning against the refrigerator, his head thrown back, eyes closed, breathing deeply as if trying to stop a panic attack. Sarah looked down at her plate, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped her fork. Leo seemed oblivious, but I saw the tension in his small shoulders. He knew something was wrong, even if he didn't understand the vocabulary of debt. My blood boiled. Not with anger at them, but with a ferocious, protective rage. Someone named Henderson was threatening to take this home away from them. Someone was threatening to put my grandson on the street. The billionaire in me woke up, the shark that had been dormant for days. I wanted to snatch the phone, call this Henderson, and buy the bank he worked for just to fire him. I wanted to write a check right there on the table that would solve all their problems forever. But I couldn't. If I did that, the charade would end. Julian would know. And his pride, the same stubborn pride he inherited from me, would make him reject the money. He would rather live in a tent than take a handout from the father who had called him a failure. Julian returned to the table, a forced smile plastered on his face. It was a brave mask, but I saw the cracks. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "Fine," Julian lied. "Just a supplier nagging about an invoice." "Boring stuff." He looked at me. "Sorry about that, Artie." "Don't apologize," I said, gripping the edge of the table to stop my hands from shaking. Life happens. After dinner, while Sarah cleared the table, Leo dragged me to the living room. "Read to me?" he asked, holding up a battered book about knights and dragons. I sat on the lumpy sofa, my joints protesting, and Leo climbed up beside me, leaning his head against my arm. I began to read. My voice, usually so sharp and commanding, softened into a storytelling cadence I hadn't used since Julian was this age. I read about bravery, about honor, about fighting monsters, and as I read, I felt a small, warm weight against my side. Leo had fallen asleep. I looked down at him, my grandson, sleeping peacefully against the ribcage that housed my failing heart. The emotion that surged through me was so powerful it was almost painful. It was a love so fierce it terrified me. I looked up and saw Julian leaning against the doorframe, watching us. His arms were crossed, and there was a look of wonder on his face. "He likes you," Julian whispered. "He doesn't usually trust strangers." "He's a special boy," I whispered back, afraid to move and wake him. "He is," Julian said, his voice cracking. I want to give him the world, Artie. And I feel like I'm failing him every single day." "You are not failing him," I said, with an intensity that made Julian blink. "You are present. You are kind. You are here. That is not failure, Julian. That is everything." Julian looked at me, really looked at me, and for a second, the air in the room shifted. "You sound like..." "Never mind." He shook his head. "Thank you, Artie, for the help today, for this." "I should go," I said, gently shifting Leo so Julian could pick him up. "I'm tired." Julian walked me to the door. The night air was cold, biting. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked. "I can't pay you any more than today, but I'll be there," I promised. 8 a.m. sharp. I walked back to my car in the darkness, my mind racing. The clock was ticking louder now. Friday. He had until Friday before the foreclosure process started. That was 3 days away. I couldn't reveal myself, but I couldn't let them lose this house. I sat in the driver's seat of the sedan, the engine idling, and pulled out the burner phone I had bought. I wasn't going to call Vance. I was going to make a call to my personal attorney, a man who knew better than to ask questions. Arthur Sterling was dying, yes, but Artie? Artie was just getting started, and for the first time in my life, I was going to use my money for something other than power. I was going to use it for a miracle, but miracles, I knew, required sacrifice, and my heart was already beginning to stutter in a rhythm that warned me the cost might be higher than I could afford. I put the car in gear. I had a bank to buy and a secret to keep. The next 48 hours were a blur of physical agony and frantic, clandestine machinations. While Artie swept floors and stacked lumber in the dusty workshop, Arthur Sterling was orchestrating the most complex deal of his career via burner phone from the bathroom stall of a gas station. I had instructed my personal attorney, a man named Thorne, who possessed the discretion of a tombstone, to set up a shell entity. We called it the Craftsman Heritage Foundation. It was a ghost organization, created out of thin air with an endowment of $5 million. Pocket change for me, but a fortune for Oakhaven. The narrative was simple. The foundation identified struggling, high-quality artisans to preserve traditional craftsmanship. Julian was to be the first recipient of a lifetime achievement grant that would not only wipe out his mortgage and business debts, but secure his son's education forever. It had to be airtight. It had to look bureaucratic and random. If Julian sniffed even a hint of charity, or worse, a hint of me, he would burn the check. Thursday passed in a haze of pain. My heart was no longer just failing. It was actively revolting. Every beat was a labor, a wet, heavy thud that echoed in my ears like a drum of war. I was gray, sweating through my flannel shirt despite the autumn chill. Julian noticed. He tried to send me home at noon, his eyes filled with concern. "You look terrible, Artie," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Go rest, please. The shop isn't going anywhere." I refused. I couldn't leave. I had to be there when the miracle happened. I had to see the moment the weight was lifted from his shoulders. It was the only payment I wanted for my life. So I lied, claiming it was just a touch of flu, and sat on a stool, polishing the same table leg for 3 hours, conserving every ounce of energy for the grand finale. Friday morning arrived with the grim atmosphere of an execution. The deadline for the foreclosure was 5 p.m. Julian was moving through the shop like a zombie, his movements mechanical and lifeless. He wasn't working. He was tidying up. He was preparing to close down. I saw him caress the handle of his favorite chisel, a look of profound mourning on his face. It broke me. I wanted to scream, "Wait, it's coming," but I had to play the part of the ignorant old man. "Quiet day?" I asked, my voice a jagged whisper. Julian didn't look up. "The quietest," he murmured. "Might be the last one, Artie. I might have to let you go today. Permanently." "You never know," I said, clutching my chest where the pain was radiating down my left arm. "Things change. The wind shifts." "Not this wind," Julian said bitterly. "This is a hurricane." At 1 p.m., a black sedan pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a limousine. Thorne knew better, but it was clean, sharp, and out of place in front of the peeling paint of the workshop. Julian froze. He wiped his hands on his apron, expecting the bank, the sheriff, the end. I watched from the shadows of the lumber rack, my breath shallow, my vision tunneling. Thorne stepped out. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than the entire building, but he had loosened his tie to look approachable. He carried a leather briefcase. Julian met him at the door, his posture defensive. "If you're looking for the payment," Julian started, his voice shaking, "I told Mr. Henderson I need until 5. "Mr. Sterling?" Thorne asked. Julian flinched at the name. "Yes, Julian Sterling. I'm not from the bank," Thorne said, his voice smooth, practiced. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I represent the Craftsman Heritage Foundation. May I come in?" I watched the scene unfold like a silent film. Julian, confused, led him to the small, dusty office in the corner. Through the glass partition, I saw them sit. I saw Thorne open the briefcase. I saw him slide a thick envelope across the desk. I saw Julian pick it up, open it, and read the letter. I saw the moment the words hit him. He stopped. He reread it. He looked at Thorne, then back at the paper. He shook his head, mouthing the word no. Thorne spoke, gesturing with his hands, explaining the grant, the selection process, the preservation of art. Then Julian dropped the paper. He put his face in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. He wasn't laughing. He was sobbing. It was a release of tension so primal, so violent, that I could feel the vibrations of it through the floor. He stood up and shook Thorne's hand, not once, but vigorously, holding on as if Thorne were a lifeline in a storm. Thorne left 10 minutes later. He paused as he walked past the lumber rack, catching my eye in the shadows. He gave a microscopic nod, mission accomplished, and walked out. Julian stayed in the office for a long time. When he finally emerged, he looked like a man who had just been pulled from a shipwreck. His eyes were red, but there was a light in them that hadn't been there for a decade. He walked into the middle of the workshop and looked around, as if seeing the tools for the first time. "Artie," he called out, his voice cracking. I stepped out from the shadows, leaning heavily on a broom for support. "Yeah, boss?" "You won't believe it," he whispered, walking toward me, a smile breaking through the tears. We're saved. I don't know how, I don't know why, but a foundation. They gave us a grant. The house, the shop, Leo's school. It's covered. It's all covered." "That's wonderful," I rasped, smiling. "I told you. The wind shifts." "I have to call Sarah," he said, pulling out his phone, his hands shaking so hard he could barely dial. "I have to. Artie, you're staying." "You hear me? You have a job here as long as you want. You're good luck. That's what you are. You're my lucky charm." He turned away to make the call, pacing the floor, laughing into the phone, shouting the good news to his wife. "Sarah, it's gone. The debt is gone. I swear to God." I watched him, bathed in the afternoon sun, and I felt a peace settle over me that was deeper than the ocean. I had done it. I had fixed the unfixable. My legacy wasn't the tower in the city. It was this. It was the relief in his voice. It was the future of the boy with the wooden sword. And then, the bill came due. The pain in my chest exploded. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a demolition. It felt like a sledgehammer had shattered my sternum. The gray curtain slammed down over my eyes. I couldn't breathe. My legs, which had carried me through this deception, turned to water. I dropped the broom. It clattered to the floor with a sound that seemed miles away. "Artie?" Julian's voice. Distant, echoing. I tried to reach for the workbench, but my hand swiped through empty air. The world tilted sideways. The concrete floor rushed up to meet me. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the remaining air from my lungs. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stare up at the dusty skylights, watching the dust motes dance in the light. "Artie!" Julian dropped the phone. I heard his boots sprinting across the floor. His face appeared above me, upside down, filled with terror. The joy was gone, replaced by panic. "Artie, can you hear me? Artie!" He was patting my cheek, frantic. "Call 911, Sarah, call 911, he collapsed." He was screaming into the phone now, giving the address. He ripped open the top buttons of my flannel shirt to give me air. I wanted to tell him it was okay. I wanted to tell him I was happy, but my mouth wouldn't work. My vision was fading to black, the edges closing in. Then, I felt his hands on my chest. He was checking for a heartbeat, but his hand brushed against the inside pocket of the shirt, the pocket where I had foolishly, carelessly, kept the wallet I retrieved from the car that morning to pay for gas. The wallet that contained my driver's license. The wallet that contained the photo of Elena. The wallet that said, Arthur Sterling, in gold letters on the leather. "Hang on, Artie, hang on!" Julian was sobbing. "Help is coming." His hand dipped into the pocket, perhaps looking for medication, perhaps looking for ID for the paramedics. He pulled out the wallet. I saw it in his hand, blurry but distinct. I saw him look at it. I saw the confusion. He flipped it open. Time stopped. The ambulance sirens were a distant wail, getting closer. But in the silence of the workshop, the only sound was the shattering of the lie. Julian stared at the ID. He stared at the photo of his mother. He looked down at me, his eyes wide, his mouth opening in a silent scream of realization. The concern on his face curdled into shock, into disbelief, into a storm of emotions I couldn't process. "Dad?" he whispered. The word hung in the air, heavier than the millions I had just given him. I tried to smile. I tried to say, "I'm sorry," but the darkness swallowed me whole. The last thing I saw was my son's face, not looking at a stranger named Artie, but looking at the father he thought he had lost, dying on his workshop floor. And I didn't know if the look in his eyes was forgiveness or if it was the final terrible judgment. The lights went out. The world outside the workshop became a screaming, flashing kaleidoscope of red and blue. The siren was deafening, tearing through the quiet streets of Oakhaven. Julian held me, his hands shaking, his voice pleading with the EMTs as they stabilized my failing body. The drive to the hospital was a chaotic blur, but in the close confines of the ambulance, the truth, so recently unearthed, burned between us, sharper than the sterile smell of antiseptic. Julian didn't look at the monitors. He looked at the wallet clutched in his hand. He kept whispering, "Dad, Dad, why?" A question that held shock, betrayal, and a terrifying, desperate hope all at once. At the hospital, they rushed me away, reducing the mighty Arthur Sterling to a sequence of beeps on a cardiac monitor. Julian was left stranded in the fluorescent-lit purgatory of the waiting room. He didn't sit, he paced, the Arthur Sterling wallet feeling like a cinder block in his palm. Sarah arrived an hour later, breathless, having rushed from home after the frantic call. She found Julian staring blankly at the wall, the paper confirming the anonymous grant spread out next to the mahogany-colored wallet. "Julian, what happened? Is Artie okay?" Julian didn't answer right away. He simply pushed the wallet and the grant letter across the table to her. "Read that name," he whispered, his voice raw. "Look at the picture on the license, then look at the date on the grant, the timing, the money, the desperation." Sarah took the wallet and opened it. Her expression morphed through 1,000 emotions, recognition, confusion, then a searing pity. "Arthur Sterling," she breathed. "He was here, this whole time. Sweep the floors for $50 a week." She looked up at Julian, tears blurring her vision. "He didn't come to hurt us, Julian. He came to save us. He came to see if we were worth saving." The betrayal Julian felt, the sting of the elaborate lie, was instantly overshadowed by the devastating, beautiful absurdity of the truth. His father, the cold, powerful mogul he had spent a decade hating, had stripped himself bare, risked his life, and endured physical pain just to spend a few hours sweeping floors, just to earn a meager dinner invitation. He hadn't sent a proxy. He had sent his only self, a humble, dying man called Artie. Arthur Sterling hadn't repented with a check from the tower. He had repented with a broom and a carefully carved wooden sword. "He lied," Julian choked out, sinking into a plastic chair. "He came into our home and lied to us, Sarah. He didn't trust me enough to tell the truth." "He didn't lie to deceive you," Sarah countered, her voice firm. "He lied to protect you. He knew if he walked in here as Arthur Sterling, you would have rejected the man and the money, Julian. He wanted to buy his way back in, yes, but not with his wallet. He wanted to buy his way back in with his heart. He wanted to see if the love was real before he died." Her words were a scalpel, cutting away the decade of bitterness and anger. Julian looked down at the wallet, no longer seeing a symbol of corporate greed, but a pathetic, desperate passport used by a dying man to sneak back into the only life that mattered. The forgiveness wasn't a choice. It was an overwhelming necessity. It was 3 hours before the doctor gave them permission to see me. They had stabilized the arrhythmia, but the message was stark. My heart was failing. I had days, perhaps hours, left. The doctor left the room, pulling the door shut on the sterile silence. Julian walked to my bedside. I was pale, hooked up to a dozen wires, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor, the only sound that proved I still existed. Julian placed the wallet on the bedside table, next to the half-empty water pitcher. He took my hand, his rough carpenter's hand enveloping my thin, weak one. "Dad," he whispered, the word feeling alien yet utterly right on his tongue. He gripped my hand, his tears falling onto the sheets. I know who you are. I know about the grant. I know about Artie." He paused, collecting himself. "I spent 10 years hating you. hating the man who chose a merger over his son. I hated the man who ruined my dreams and disowned me. But that man isn't here, is he? That man died somewhere between the penthouse and Oakhaven. Julian leaned closer, his voice cracking with emotion. I forgive him. I forgive Arthur Sterling. But I don't care about him. I care about Artie, the old man who swept my floors, who read my son's stories, who risked his life just to see me smile one last time. That's my father, and I want you to know this. You didn't fail, Dad. You won. He continued to talk, pouring out every memory, every frustration, every ounce of buried love. He told me about the wooden sword he kept hidden in the truck. He told me he understood now that fear had driven my ambition, not malice. He told me he was proud to be my son. As he spoke, something miraculous happened. Not the medical kind. My eyes fluttered open. The machines didn't surge, the lights didn't brighten. But in the hazy vision of the hospital room, I saw Julian. I heard every word. The forgiveness I had begged for, the absolution I thought impossible, filled the room. I felt the physical tension in my chest ease, the pain receding from the crushing reality of a heart attack to a dull, manageable ache. I tried to squeeze his hand. I tried to say, Julian, but all that came out was a soft, wet cough. I forced a small, genuine smile, the first real smile I had worn in decades, the one that matched the photograph on the beach. I had paid the price. I had won the prize. A few weeks later, the physical shell of Arthur Sterling gave out. Not in the sterile solitude of the penthouse, but in a rented cottage just a block from Julian's home. The wealth was legally transferred, bypassing bureaucracy. It didn't just save Julian. It established the Craftsman Heritage Foundation in perpetuity, turning a covert act of love into a lasting legacy of giving. My destiny had changed. I was buried not as the ruthless tycoon who died alone, but as Artie, beloved father and grandfather, in the small, sun-drenched cemetery overlooking Oakhaven. My last moment was spent not counting stock options, but counting heartbeats. Leo's small, warm head resting against my chest, Julian holding my hand. The final breath was not one of fear, but of profound peace. The millionaire repented too late for his physical life, but his forgiveness was asked for and granted just in time for his soul. He had traded all his riches for 2 weeks of love, and in that exchange, he finally became the man he was always meant to be. Not Arthur Sterling, the Titan, but Artie, the family man. The tower in the city stood empty and cold, a monument to a life wasted. But in Oakhaven, a home was filled with light, secured by a sacrifice far more valuable than gold, proving that sometimes the only way to truly change your destiny is to be willing to lose everything you think you are. And that, in the end, is the greatest trade of all.